A man can take a punch, even a beating. But betrayal? That's a different kind of pain. It doesn't bruise. It doesn't swell. It just sits there, heavy, like a fist pressing into your gut. My name's Daniel Freeman. I'm 54 years old. I used to be a heavyweight champion. Now I run Iron Haven Boxing Club, a place where kids who got nothing but their fists learn how to use them right. I've taken my share of hits inside the ring and out. I know what it's like to pick yourself up off the mat when the world's trying to keep you down. But nothing in my life trained me for this. The Copper Mug Cafe was my spot. After morning training, I'd swing by, grab a black coffee, maybe a bagel if I was feeling generous to myself. It was routine, like wrapping your hands before a fight. What I didn't expect that morning was to walk in and see my wife, Caitlin, leaning in too close to some slick-looking kid in a navy suit. Mitchell Wallace. I knew the type. Young, ambitious, full of himself, thinking the world owed him something. The kind of guy who never had to fight for anything because he was always looking for an easy way up. Caitlin laughed at something he said, tilting her head in that way she used to when we first started dating. Her fingers brushed his hand, just for a second, but that was enough. Marge Green, sitting 2 tables away, noticed too. She always noticed. Nose buried in a newspaper, but those beady eyes of hers flicked right over the rim of her glasses. I should have turned and walked out. Pretended I didn't see. Could have kept my dignity, avoided the scene. But dignity wasn't in the cards today. I walked up, dropped my gym bag with a dull thud. The sound made Caitlin's shoulders go stiff before she even looked up. Mitchell glanced at me, smirking like I was some old man who didn't know his place. Something funny? I asked, my voice low. Caitlin's face drained of color. Dan, I raised a hand, cutting her off. Didn't need to hear the excuses. Didn't need the lies. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, trying to play it cool. Relax, old man. We were just talking. Yeah, I said, cracking my knuckles. You do a lot of talking with another man's wife? Caitlin inhaled sharply, eyes darting around, checking who was watching. She knew damn well everyone was. Mitchell scoffed, but I could see it in his posture, shoulders tightening, his weight shifting like he was calculating if he needed to run. He knew exactly who I was. I saw it in his eyes. Maybe he thought I'd start swinging, make a scene, prove whatever story he and Caitlin had cooked up in their heads about me being some violent brute. I smiled. Not the friendly kind. You already beat, kid, I said, shaking my head. Mitchell frowned. What the hell does that mean? Caitlin finally found her voice. Dan, please, don't do this here. I turned to her, really looked at her for the first time in months. The woman I married, the woman I built a life with, was gone. This Caitlin? This was someone else. Someone who made choices she thought she could take back with the right words. You made this bed, I said quietly, stepping back. Hope he's as good at lying in it as he is at running his mouth. I picked up my bag, turned, and walked out. I didn't have to look back to know Marge was already pulling out her phone. The whole damn town would know before I finished my coffee. I drove straight to Iron Haven, my gym, the only place that ever made sense. The smell of sweat and leather hit me the second I walked in. The heavy bag swayed slightly from the last guy who used them. The sound of fists connecting with pads echoed off the old brick walls. This place had seen kids come in with nothing but anger and leave with something close to discipline. I'd spent my life teaching them how to fight, how to stand tall. And now? Now I needed to take my own advice. I threw my bag in the office and grabbed my wraps. My hands needed something to do, and beating the hell out of a heavy bag seemed like a better option than putting my fist through a wall. Hey, coach, you good? I looked up. Luis, one of my kids, barely 20, stood by the ring, wiping sweat off his face with a towel. Good fighter. Fast hands, sharper mind. He had a title shot coming up. Yeah, I said, rolling my shoulders. Why? He shrugged, eyeing me the way a fighter sizes up an opponent. You look like you're about to put someone in the ground. I exhaled sharply. That'll do for now. Luis didn't push. Smart kid. He just nodded, grabbed his gear, and got back to work. I went at the bag harder than I should have. Jab, cross, hook. Felt the resistance, let my knuckles take the impact. Didn't stop till my arms burned. Didn't stop till the image of Caitlin at that table started to blur. By the time I was done, my breathing was steady again, my hands stung, and my head was clearer. I walked back to the office, grabbed my phone. 10 missed calls. Caitlin. I stared at the screen, then tossed it on the desk. Let her squirm. It took 2 days for her to show up at the gym. She stood by the entrance like she was afraid to step in, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing her differently now. Dan, she started, voice careful. Can we talk? I wiped my hands on a towel, took my time. We talking now, aren't we? Her jaw tightened. She wanted me to make it easy for her. I wasn't going to. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said finally. I laughed, shaking my head. That's supposed to mean something? Her face flushed. I don't know. I miss you. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just a kind of dull acceptance. You miss me, or you miss the way I never asked questions? Her mouth opened, then closed. She knew I had her pegged. Look, Dan, she said, voice softer now, like she thought she could ease her way back in. It wasn't about you. I don't know. I felt stuck. Mitchell made me feel like I mattered again. I rolled my neck, feeling the tension build again. Yeah? That work out for you? She looked down. That told me all I needed to know. Mitchell wasn't answering her calls anymore. Whatever fantasy she'd built up in her head had crumbled the second I walked away and left her to deal with the fallout. Dan, I held up a hand, stopping her cold. I don't care. She blinked. What? I don't care, I repeated, tossing the towel aside. You did what you did. You think I'm going to stand here and listen to some half-assed explanation like it changes anything? Save it. Her eyes welled up, but I wasn't falling for it. Dan, please. I want to fix this. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the one I married. That woman was gone. There's nothing to fix, I said. She took a shaky breath, nodded, then turned and walked out the door. I stood there for a second, letting the quiet settle. Then I grabbed my gloves, walked back to the ring, and got back to work. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't hit all at once. It comes in waves. First is the shock, like taking a clean right hook to the jaw. Then comes the anger, the kind that makes your hand shake if you don't do something with it. And then comes the part one knew best, the waiting. The patience. Letting the other guy think he's winning while you line up the shot that's going to end it. Caitlin thought I'd come crawling back, or at least that I'd break down and scream at her, give her some dramatic scene she could twist into a reason for what she did. Mitchell? He thought he walked away clean, like he'd gotten one over on the old fighter who didn't know how the game worked. I was fine letting them believe both those lies for now. I stopped answering Caitlin's calls. Stopped acknowledging her existence altogether. If she wanted to spend her time playing house with some corporate snake, she could do it without me in the way. I didn't file for divorce yet. That would come later. I wasn't going to give her an easy way out. At the gym, life went on. I focused on my fighters, made sure they were keeping their heads right. But the moment I stepped outside, the whispers started. The town already knew. Marge had made sure of that. I was standing in line at the Copper Mug, waiting for my coffee, when I heard her voice behind me. Such a shame, huh? I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. Marge, I swear to God, if you're about to. She clucked her tongue. Now, Dan. You can't blame a woman for keeping up with the news. And this? This is front page material. I turned, gave her a flat look. You write for the paper now? She grinned. Might as well. So, tell me, how's Caitlin holding up? I saw her the other day, look downright miserable. Poor thing. I have to laugh. You feel bad for her? Oh, hell no, Marge said, stirring her coffee. But I do love watching karma do its job. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I just grabbed my coffee and walked out. But her words stuck. Caitlin was miserable? Good. That meant it was working. A week passed before I ran into Mitchell again. He was walking out of Benson and McDonald Financial, looking like he had the world at his feet. Sharp suit, expensive watch, that same smug look on his face. I could have let him walk by. Could have let him enjoy his little moment. Instead, I stepped right into his path. Freeman, he said, adjusting his cuffs. You lost. I smiled. Just wondering how long you think this is gonna last. Mitchell cocked his head. How long what's gonna last? I took a sip of my coffee, let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Your job. Your reputation. The way people look at you when you walk in a room. Mitchell laughed, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now. You trying to scare me, old man? I shook my head. Nah. Just making sure you appreciate what you got. While you got it. I stepped around him, walking off before he could come up with some smartass remark. Let him chew on that. Let the paranoia start working its way in. Because while he was out here thinking he'd won, I was already taking the first steps to making sure he lost everything. Mitchell might have thought he had everything under control, but I knew guys like him. They always had one weakness, ego. The need to be seen, to be admired, to be on top. And the second that image cracked, they scrambled. I didn't need to throw a punch. I just needed to let the cracks spread. It started small. A few conversations in the right places. Vincent and McDonald wasn't some mom-and-pop shop. It was a corporate firm, full of men in suits who pretended to like each other, but were just waiting for the first sign of weakness. Mitchell had been climbing that ladder fast, too fast. People already didn't trust him. All it took was a little nudge. A buddy of mine, Tommy Griggs, worked in finance. He owed me one from way back when I helped his kid get off the streets and into a gym. So I called in the favor. "You're looking into this Wallace kid?" Tommy asked over the phone. "Not me," I said. "Just wondering if the guys upstairs at Benson and McDonald know what kind of shortcuts he's been taking." Tommy chuckled. "You got something, or you just fishing?" "Both," I said. "But I figure a guy like him? You start looking, you'll find something." A few days later, word got out. Nothing big at first. Just whispers. Some clients had concerns. A few transactions didn't quite add up. Mitchell had been padding numbers, making himself look more valuable than he was. Not illegal, not yet, but enough to make the firm start watching him closer. And in a place like that, once people smelled blood, it didn't take long before they started circling. While that was brewing, I set up the real hit. Caitlin's office was hosting a company event, a quarterly awards thing, the kind of place where people got up and gave long, boring speeches about teamwork and success. Mitchell had been bragging about how he was getting some kind of recognition, a step closer to his next promotion. Perfect. I made a few more calls. The guys at the gym knew people. Some ran small businesses. Some ran tech. One of them ran a media company that specialized in digital marketing. It didn't take much convincing to get him to help me put together a little surprise. The night of the event, I wasn't there. Didn't need to be. I just got the play-by-play from Marge, who had somehow managed to get herself an invite. Don't ask me how. It started normal. People mingling, drinking overpriced cocktails. Mitchell up there in his expensive suit, grinning like he belonged there. Caitlin sitting at one of the front tables, dressed up like none of this was about to go sideways. Then the screens lit up. At first, people thought it was part of the presentation, a slideshow about the company's successes. But then the images changed. Caitlin and Mitchell, together. Not just at the cafe. Other places too. A hotel lobby. A parking garage. Caitlin looking up at him with that same expression I used to see when we were younger. Silence spread through the room like a slow-moving fire. The murmurs started. Someone gasped. And then the whispers turned into full-blown conversations. People shifting in their seats, looking at Caitlin, looking at Mitchell. Mitchell shot up out of his chair, face pale. "Turn that off," he snapped, his voice cracking. Too late. One of the managers stood, arms crossed. "Mr. Wallace, would you care to explain this?" Caitlin looked like she wanted to disappear. Her hands were shaking. Mitchell opened his mouth, closed it again. There was nothing he could say. That was the moment he lost. Marge called me that night, practically giddy. "Dan, I swear on my mother's grave, you should have been there." That little weasel turned 3 different shades of white. Caitlin? She just sat there, looking like she might pass out. I listened, barely smiling. "They fired him?" "Oh, honey," Marge said. "They did more than that. He's done." I leaned back in my chair, watching the rain hit the window outside the gym. One fight down. One more to go. The fallout came fast. Mitchell got dragged into a performance review the next morning, which was just a polite way of saying they were lining him up for the firing squad. Word spread through the firm like wildfire. Clients started asking questions. His name was attached to too many deals that suddenly looked shaky. The big bosses didn't like risks, and Mitchell? He was one now. Caitlin wasn't much better off. She tried to go about her day like nothing had changed, but the looks from her coworkers told her otherwise. Nobody outright said anything, not at first, but in an office like that, silence was worse. She had spent years building a reputation as the steady one, the dependable one. Now she was just a scandal. And scandals don't get promotions. She called me that night. I let it ring out. Then she texted. "Caitlin, can we talk?" "Caitlin, please, Dan." "Caitlin, I just need to explain." I turned my phone over and went back to wrapping Louis's hands. "You're distracted," he said, flexing his fingers under the tape. I smirked. "You're just getting sharper." He gave me a look like he knew I was lying, but he didn't push it. Good kid. The next morning, Caitlin showed up at the gym. She looked rough. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered to do much with it. She hesitated in the doorway, watching the kids spar in the ring. I kept my focus on the bag, throwing tight, controlled punches. She'd have to come to me. Dan, her voice was small. I ignored it. She stepped closer. I know you're mad. I snapped off one last punch and turned, letting the bag swing between us. Mad? I repeated, wiping sweat from my forehead. Nah, Caitlin. Mad was a couple weeks ago. I'm past that. Her eyes flickered. Then can we talk? I gestured around. We're talking. She took a deep breath, like she was preparing for a fight. I lost my job, she said. I waited, let the words hang between us. She exhaled sharply. Dan. I don't have anyone else to talk to. My parents won't even return my calls. That one almost made me smile. Almost. So what do you want from me? I asked, unwrapping my hands. She looked down. I don't know. I messed up, okay? I didn't think things would go like this. Like what? I asked, stepping closer. Like people finding out? Like facing consequences? She swallowed hard. Like losing you. I studied her for a second. Once, I might have believed her. Might have let myself think that maybe, just maybe, there was something left to save. But that man was gone. You didn't lose me, I said, shaking my head. You threw me away. She flinched. Dan, please. I grabbed my towel, slung it over my shoulder. You got choices, Caitlin. You always did. But I ain't one of 'em anymore. I turned my back and walked away. She didn't follow. A week passed. Caitlin stopped trying to call. Maybe she finally got the message. Maybe she was too busy dealing with the mess she made. Either way, she wasn't my problem anymore. Mitchell, though, he was still out there, still trying to salvage what was left of his name. He didn't have a job at Benson and McDonald anymore. No firm wanted to touch him. He went from wearing $1,000 suits to sending out resumes, hoping someone still saw him as a rising star instead of the guy who got caught screwing his coworker and fudging numbers. I wasn't done with him yet. One afternoon, I walked into Westgate Auto, the kind of dealership that slapped luxury in the name but had more finance rejections than actual sales. Mitchell stood near the front desk, his usual confidence cracked but not completely gone. He was still wearing suits, though they looked cheaper now. His tie was a little looser, like he wasn't used to selling things to people who weren't desperate to impress their bosses. I let him notice me. Took my time walking through the showroom, running a hand over the hood of a car I had no interest in buying. Mitchell's shoulders went tight. He glanced around, as if checking if anyone else saw me. Then he forced a smile and walked over. Freeman, he said, his voice forced casual. Didn't expect to see you here. I smirked. Needed a laugh. His jaw twitched. He knew exactly what I meant. What do you want? He asked, keeping his voice low. I leaned on the car between us. Just came to see how you're adjusting. I imagine it's a bit different from your old job. Less scamming, more actual work. Mitchell's hands curled into fists at his sides. Screw you. I grinned. Already did that to yourself. His face went red, but he didn't have a comeback. Didn't have an audience to impress anymore. The power shift had already happened, and he knew it. Why are you even here? He muttered, voice bitter. I stepped closer, lowered my voice so only he could hear. Because I want you to understand something. You were never in my league. You thought you won because you took something that wasn't yours. But see, real fighters? We don't break. We wait. And when the time's right, we make sure guys like you never step foot in our ring again. His breathing got shallow. He couldn't even look me in the eye. I patted his shoulder, just hard enough to make him flinch. Good luck, kid. I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there, fist clenched, knowing there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. That night, I got a call from Tommy Griggs. Figured you'd want to know, Tommy said, his voice amused. Word is, Wallace's got one last shot at a job, but his old boss isn't giving him a reference. Nobody wants to take the risk. I smiled. Shame. Tommy chuckled. Yeah, shame. Caitlin was out. Mitchell was done. And me? I was just getting started. A few days later, I got an invitation to a gala downtown. A sports development program was looking for trainers, and an old friend of mine, Rick McDonald, was running it. He wanted me to come, talk to some people, maybe take on a bigger role. I wasn't sure at first. My gym was my home, but maybe it was time to think bigger. That night, I showed up in a suit, not something I was used to, but I had to admit, it felt good. I shook hands, listened, nodded when I needed to. Then, just as I was thinking about leaving, I heard a voice behind me. Didn't expect to see you here, Dan. I turned. Elena Roberts. Sports journalist. Sharp, tough, Knew the game better than most fighters. We went way back. Elena, I said, offering a small grin. Didn't expect to see you, either. She smirked. Guess we're both full of surprises. She clinked her glass against mine, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about what came next. I stood in the middle of Iron Haven, watching the kid in the ring move. He was quick, but his footwork was sloppy. Too much weight on the front leg, leaving himself open. I could see it before he even realized it. Drop your right, I called out. You keep leading with your chin like that, you're gonna eat canvas. The kid, Mikey, barely 18, scrappy but raw, gritted his teeth and adjusted. Threw another jab, this time tighter, sharper. I nodded. Better. He went another round, sweat dripping, knuckles hitting the pads hard enough to echo off the walls. I leaned against the ropes, arms crossed. This gym had been through a lot, but it was still here. I was still here. And that mattered. The last few months had been a fight. Not the kind I was used to, but a fight all the same. Caitlin had tried once more, showed up outside my place, acting like she wanted to clear the air. I didn't even let her finish. Just told her, we're done. We've been done. Move on. Then I shut the door in her face. She had no job, no Mitchell, no safety net. Last I heard, she moved a few towns over, trying to start fresh where nobody knew her name. Good luck with that. Mitchell? He never bounced back. Westgate Auto let him go after a month. Word was, he burned every bridge he had. Nobody wanted to hire a guy who was known for backstabbing. Last I checked, he was working a temp job, scraping by. Me? I moved forward. I took Rick up on his offer. Started working with the Next Gen Boxing Academy a few nights a week, helping train the next crop of professionals. Still ran my gym, still mentored my fighters, but now I had a bigger reach. Bigger opportunities. At the gala, I expected the usual networking bullshit, but running into Elena Roberts? That was something else. She had a way of cutting through the noise, getting right to the truth of things. We started talking, kept talking, and before I knew it, we were meeting for drinks, catching fights together, just picking up like we never lost time. Now, I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this. I wasn't looking back. The bell rang in the gym, signaling the end of the round. Mikey staggered to the ropes, breathing heavy. I stepped into the ring, crouched down to his level. You tired? He wiped sweat from his brow, nodded. Good, I said. Means you're working. But we ain't done yet. He groaned. Come on. Coach, I can barely feel my arms. I smirked. You'll thank me later. Now get up. He grumbled, but got to his feet. That's what mattered. I glanced around the gym, hearing the steady rhythm of bags being hit, the sound of gloves against mitts, the low chatter of fighters pushing themselves past their limits. This place was mine. This life was mine. No woman, no betrayal, no cheap shot suit could take that away. I stepped back, let the kid get his breath, then nodded toward the center of the ring. All right, I said. Show me what you've got. And just like that, the past was where it belonged, behind me.